If you're like me, you overthink the name of a business, of a podcast, of the YouTube channel. You overthink these things. I know I do. And this is how I have picked the name for a lot of things I have created. What is up, everybody? My name is Skylar Beitendorf. I am a podcast growth coach, and you're listening to Real Podcasters. It's a podcast on how to grow your show so you can monetize it. And today we are talking about how to pick a name for your podcast. This is a thing a lot of people get hung up on because we want the name to be perfect. And I used to overthink this one a lot. So I'm going to run you through the process I go through with clients, with myself to name something. So let's start from where you have your podcast, you know the subject, you know what you want to talk about, but you just can't pick the perfect name. So go in your notes, and I want you to word vomit all over your notes there. And I just want you to say possible names in the notes for your podcast. And then you're going to go from there, and you're going to think of a name, and then you're going to hit enter, go down the next line, name, next line, name. And I want you to get out about 30, 40, 50 names, possible names for your podcast. Just all the weird things that come out, get them down, get them out of your head, get them into your notes. Write down everything that comes to your mind, the weird ones, the cool ones, the ones that you definitely know aren't available that other people have. And once you get 50 out, honestly, once you get to 25, you're going to start to kind of struggle. These are when the more creative ones are going to start to come. And a way to get more out is go look at some of the names you've already said. And sometimes if you have a podcast name that's amazing creators, and you have one that's called Creators Success, you could call it Amazing Success or Creators a Success, or something that mixes the two words together. That's a lot of times what my names come from. It was two different names that I just took the best parts from and meshed them together, and it flowed well. So try doing that with with this exercise, writing everything down that you can just to get it all out. You just need to get it out of your head. From there, I want you to take your top 10 from your whole list and put it down further and say, these are my top 10. Okay. Then I want you to make another list, your top 5 list. This is where it's going to start to get hard. Your top 5, or your top favorite. And then from there, I want you to find your top 3. And then from your top 3, I want you to go do a little research on these names. Is the name available? Or is there already a successful podcast that is called that name? So go on Apple, check Apple and Spotify, because there are podcasts that are only on Apple. There's podcasts that are only on Spotify. There are podcasts that are only on YouTube too, actually. I was going to pick a name, and I had checked Apple, Spotify, and I thought I was good. I started to create it, and then I was like, I should check YouTube really quick. And I go and check YouTube, and sure enough, someone had started a podcast a few months back, and it was pretty well produced too. So I knew it was going to grow big. I knew they were going to continue doing it. So I did not go with that one, which kind of sucked, right? I was like, oh man, it was like the perfect name. But I actually did finding a name that was better than the one I was going to go with. So all good. But make sure you check at least those 3 areas. Those are the 3 popular places to listen to podcasts: Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. If the name you're wanting to choose is taken, obviously you scratch that one off, and I want you to take another one from your top 10, maybe your top 50 or whatever. Maybe come up with a new one through this process and put it in your top 3. So go through that with all of them. When you have 3 that are really good, that you like, that are not already podcasts that are available, then we're going to go a level deeper where we're going to see if the domain name's available. Now, this isn't something you need to have to start a podcast. Like, don't let this stop you from creating the podcast. But if you're wanting to build a big brand, if you're wanting to build coaching on it, if you want to monetize it through merchandise or a lot of different things, it's really nice to have the .com. You don't need to have it, but it's really nice to have it. So check the .com, see if that's available. If it is, phenomenal. A lot of times that means no one's even thought about or even taken serious that name before with their own things. Because I guarantee you that every name you come up with, someone else has thought about it at one point. They just have never done anything with it, or they only bought the domain name, or they only set up the social media accounts. Very few people actually create the full thing. And so see if the .com is available. If it's not available, You just got to decide, if do I want to go with a .us, a .org, a .net, a .fm? I think a .fm is great if it's just a website name for your podcast. If that's all you want, you're not planning on creating a brand around it, or if it's just funneling people to something else, then yeah, you don't need it. So I like to have the .com. You don't need it. Don't let it stop you from choosing that name. But let's say you have, your top 3 names. You're kind of neutral on all of them as far as which one you like the most, and one of them has the .com available. Go with that one. Another thing to check is social media handles. Is there a social media handle available for that same one? So if your podcast is called Next Success, see if it's available on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Just see if anyone's ever done anything with that name and it's just the name of a business. Make sure it's not the name of an organization or something like that. Make sure you do your proper research on your top 3 names, and whatever is the least used or has no one that's ever thought of it before, taken it before. I personally like that because people aren't going to get confused when they're looking for you. If I have Real Podcasters as the podcast and someone's like, oh wait, I bet you they have more, I'm going to go to realpodcasters.com. Even if I've never said realpodcasters.com, they're going to expect it to be realpodcasters.com. If it's not .com, they're not going to know what to put in. Realpodcasterspodcast.com, .fm. People just don't know what to put in beyond that point. Now, it is true that a lot of people will go to your social media account and they will go to your website from there. So that way it's just clicking a link and they don't need to know it. But it's just one of those things where it helps you a little bit, and the little bits add up to a lot. So if you can get that, great. From there, if you got, let's say, 3 names, everything's available. It doesn't matter which one you pick, but you just can't choose. This is the last final step for picking a name before, even if just that one has everything available, there's just one that has the .com available, social media accounts available. This is still a process I would go through, is go ask other people, about a dozen people, say, hey, these are my top 3. This is what I'm creating. This is what it's going to be about. This is who I'm going to help. This is the business that I'm going to create around it. What do you think about this podcast name? If they like it, and if they feel like it communicates what your podcast is going to be about, then you have a winner. If one person says it, but the rest don't, you don't have a winner. But if you have multiple people, if you have 8, 10 out of the 12 that say they like it, it communicates what your show is going to be about, then you have a winner. Buy the domain, create the social media accounts, create the podcast. You are good to go. A question I get every so often is, if there is a podcast that is named something, but they haven't produced episodes in years, they only have 4 episodes, can I still use that name for my podcast? And the answer is yes. There's no domain names in the podcasting world specifically. I could go start a podcast right now called The Joe Rogan Experience. Will Joe Rogan or his team reach out to me, or legal team? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe they will. But there's nothing stopping me from having the exact same name of a podcast as someone else. And so if someone's no longer producing their podcast anymore, to me, you're good to use it because your stuff's going to be the most relevant. You're obviously going to create a big podcast. And so it's going to be the first thing that comes to the top of the list. And the last thing I touched on a little bit that I feel needs to be touched on more is make sure the name communicates what your show is about. If you are a personal development coach and you specialize in men's fitness coaching, make sure your name communicates that that's what this podcast is about. It could be fit this, or personal training this, or you just don't want it to be like Level Up Podcast or Next Win or Next Gain Podcast. It just doesn't communicate to me what your show is about. A good exercise on this, or a good way to come up with some names as well, is putting how to at the beginning of your name to just help you come up with names, and then take off the how to. So for example, I had a friend who was creating a podcast and just didn't know what to name it. They had a bunch of different names, was asking me, hey, what do you think? Asked other people, what do you think? Some people said the name doesn't matter. I personally think the name does matter. But I asked him, I was like, if you were going to name the podcast How To XYZ, what would the XYZ be? And together we came up with, okay, he's talking about finances. He's helping people win with money. Like, well, how about what if it was called How to Win with Money, but we just take off the how to. So win with money. Boom. He loved it. And that's what he went with. Make sure the name communicates the benefit of listening to the podcast, or they get an idea of what the podcast is about just from the name. You just want it to sound interesting when other people talk about what they're listening to, talk about their favorite podcast. They share their podcast on social media. If the name doesn't mean anything to the average person that sees the name, well, they're just going to see it on social media. They're going to see it scrolling on their podcast listening apps, and they're not going to do anything because it doesn't speak to them. And so if you can make it speak to them, they're going to be more likely to play and become a regular listener of your show, which means it's growing, which means you are able to monetize it that much faster, that much better. If you like the podcast Real Podcasters and you like listening to real podcasters, trust me, we are going to get guests on here that are full-time, real, paid podcasters on here very soon. And if you want to hear that, let me know by subscribing to the show. As those numbers grow, I know you guys want it more and more, and I will continue producing this type of content. Until next time, keep podcasting.